I stopped believing in Christmas miracles the exact moment one walked through my door. That probably sounds backwards to you, doesn't it? Most people lose faith gradually, like watching paint fade in the sun over years and years. But I'm 72 years old, and I've learned that life doesn't always follow the patterns we expect. Sometimes the very moment you surrender hope is precisely when hope decides to show up, uninvited and completely unexpected, standing on your front porch with tears in its eyes and apologies on its lips. My name is Margaret Collins, and for 8 years I'd been preparing myself for a future that looked exactly like my past. Quiet Christmases alone in a house that used to overflow with laughter, setting a table for one when it should seat at least 3, hanging stockings that would never be filled because the people they belonged to couldn't stand to be in the same room together. I'd made peace with it, or so I told myself every December when I pulled out the decorations and tried to remember what joy felt like. But this year, this particular Christmas Eve in 2024, something shifted. The miracle I'd given up praying for decided it was time to happen anyway. And let me tell you, when you've spent nearly a decade watching your family crumble apart like old newspaper, when reconciliation becomes something you only dare to dream about in those quiet moments before sleep, when hope itself feels like a luxury you can't afford anymore, that's when grace shows up and reminds you that some things are worth believing in after all. This is the story of how my family came back together. Not perfectly, not tied up with a neat little bow like something out of a Hallmark movie, but real and messy and more beautiful than any Christmas card could ever capture. And if you're sitting there right now, wondering if your own broken pieces can ever be put back together, wondering if it's too late for your family or your relationships or your dreams, well, stick with me. Because what happened on my front porch on Christmas Eve might just give you the courage to believe in miracles again. Before we go any further into this story, I need to ask you something. You're here watching this, listening to an old woman share her heart, and I want you to know how much that means to me. These real stories, these genuine experiences from women like me who've lived through heartbreak and come out the other side, they matter. And they're completely free for you to watch whenever you need them. But here's the thing. If this story touches your heart, if you find yourself relating to what I'm sharing, would you take just 1 second to hit that like button? I know it seems small, but it helps this channel reach other people who might need to hear that miracles can still happen. And please, subscribe and turn on that notification bell so you don't miss the other stories we share here. Leave a comment telling me what you think, or let me know what city or country you're watching from. I love knowing where our community stretches across the world. Your support, that simple click, helps us grow and reach more women who need to know they're not alone. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now let me take you back to where this all began. Asheville, North Carolina, has always been home to me. Not just the place I live, but the place that shaped who I am. The mountains that cradle this town, the changing seasons that paint the leaves every fall, the small town feeling that persists even as the city grows and changes. I was born here in 1952, in a little house on the west side of town that doesn't exist anymore, replaced by a strip mall that sells organic groceries and expensive coffee to tourists who come here for the mountain air and the art galleries. My parents, Robert and Helen McCarthy, were working people. Dad worked at the paper mill for 38 years, leaving before sunrise and coming home after sunset, his clothes always smelling faintly of chemicals and wood pulp. Mama cleaned houses for the wealthy families who lived up on Sunset Mountain, the ones with views that stretched all the way to the Blue Ridge. She'd come home with stories about marble bathrooms and chandeliers that cost more than our car, but she never said it with bitterness, just wonder at how different people lived in the same town, breathing the same air. They raised me to work hard. To be honest, to treat people with kindness, regardless of whether they could do anything for you. Your word is all you really own, Daddy used to say, usually while sitting in his worn recliner with the newspaper spread across his lap. Everything else can be taken away, but whether you're someone people can trust, that's yours to keep or lose. Those lessons stuck with me through everything that came after. I met Thomas Collins in 1970 when I was 18 and fresh out of high school. He was 22, working construction, building the new subdivision on the east side of town. I was working as a secretary at the real estate office that was selling those houses, and he'd come in every Friday to pick up his paycheck. He had dark hair that always needed a trim, hands that were permanently stained with sawdust no matter how hard he scrubbed them, and a smile that made my stomach flip every single time. Our courtship was simple but sweet. Movies at the old Empire Theater downtown, which is a vintage clothing store now. Dinners at Pete's Diner, where you could get a hamburger and fries for less than $2. Long drives up the Blue Ridge Parkway with the windows down and the radio playing whatever music came through clearly enough in the mountains. He proposed to me on my 20th birthday, right there on the same overlook where we'd watched the sunset a dozen times before, with a small diamond ring he'd been making payments on for 6 months. We got married in January of 1972 at the First Baptist Church on Merriman Avenue. Mama made my dress. Nothing fancy, just simple white cotton with lace at the collar. We couldn't afford a big reception, so we had punch and cake in the church fellowship hall, with Daddy's brother playing guitar and singing songs that made everyone cry in the best possible way. I remember thinking, as Thomas and I danced our first dance while his uncle's off-key voice filled the room, that I had everything I needed. Not everything I wanted, maybe. There were plenty of things I dreamed about, but everything I truly needed to build a life. We rented a small house on Louisiana Avenue, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew everyone and you never locked your doors. Thomas kept working construction, eventually starting his own small company with 2 friends from high school. I worked part-time at the elementary school as a teacher's aide, which eventually turned into going back to school myself to get my teaching certificate. By 1975, I was teaching 2nd grade at Valley Springs Elementary, a job I would keep for the next 30 years. Money was always tight, but we managed. We had a budget written in my careful handwriting on a yellow legal pad that lived on the kitchen counter. Every penny was accounted for: rent, utilities, groceries, the small amount we tried to save each month, even though emergencies always seemed to eat up whatever we managed to put aside. We drove used cars that Thomas kept running through sheer willpower and mechanical know-how. Our furniture was a mix of hand-me-downs and yard sale finds that I painted or recovered to make them look fresh. We wore clothes until they couldn't be repaired anymore, and even then, Mama would sometimes figure out a way to salvage the fabric for something else. But we were building something real. That's what I told myself when the roof leaked, or the car broke down, or the heating bill in January was more than we'd budgeted for. We were building a life together, and lives aren't built in moments of plenty. They're built in the daily choices to keep going, to work hard, to love each other even when you're too tired to do more than fall into bed at the end of the day. Daniel came first, in the summer of 1979. I was 27 years old, and nothing in my life had prepared me for the overwhelming love and terror that comes with holding your firstborn child. He was 7 pounds, 6 ounces of pure miracle, with Thomas's dark hair and my blue eyes. We brought him home to that little house on Louisiana Avenue, and suddenly our small life felt infinite in its possibilities. Every milestone, his first smile, his first tooth, his first steps, felt like Christmas morning and Sunday church bells all rolled into one. Thomas was a devoted father from day one. He'd come home from work, covered in sawdust and smelling of fresh-cut pine, and head straight for Danny's nursery. He built him a crib with his own hands, sanding it so carefully that you couldn't find a single rough edge. He'd walk the floors with Danny when he was colicky, singing old country songs in his off-key voice until our son finally settled. On Saturdays, even when he was exhausted from a long week of work, he'd strap Danny into the carrier and take him to the hardware store or the lumber yard, introducing him to everyone they met as my boy. Emily arrived 3 years later, in the spring of 1982. If Danny had been an easy baby, Emily was our challenge. She cried more, slept less, and had opinions about everything from day one. But she was also fierce and funny and so smart it sometimes scared me. Where Danny was cautious and thoughtful, Emily was bold and impulsive. Where he colored carefully inside the lines, She created her own lines and colored them any way she wanted. They were different from the beginning, my two children, and I loved them both with an intensity that sometimes felt like it might crack my chest open. We moved to a bigger house when Emily was 2, scraping together enough for a down payment on a modest 3-bedroom on Oakland Street. It wasn't much. The kitchen was tiny, the bathroom fixtures were ancient, and the yard was mostly red clay and dandelions. But it was ours. Thomas spent every spare moment fixing it up, teaching Danny how to hold a hammer and measure twice before cutting. Emily would follow them around with her toy tools, demanding to help even though she was barely big enough to reach the workbench. Those were good years, hard years financially speaking. There was never quite enough money, never quite enough time, always something breaking or someone needing new shoes or medical bills from Emily's chronic ear infections. But they were good despite the hardship, maybe even good because of it. We were a team, the 4 of us. Every problem we solved together felt like a victory. Every birthday we celebrated felt like beating the odds. I continued teaching, shaping young minds and wiping tears and tying endless pairs of shoelaces. Thomas's construction business grew slowly but steadily. We weren't getting rich, but we were stable. We had food on the table every night, even if it was sometimes just beans and cornbread. We took one modest vacation a year, usually just driving to the coast for a few days, staying in a cheap motel where the kids could play in the waves. We went to church every Sunday, not because we were especially holy, but because it felt like the right way to raise children, with community, with faith, with something bigger than ourselves to hold on to. Christmas was always my favorite time of year, even when money was tightest. I found ways to make it special. I'd save all year in a coffee can hidden in the back of the pantry, adding whatever spare change or extra dollar I could manage. I'd haunt yard sales and thrift stores starting in September, looking for toys and books that I could wrap up and put under the tree. I'd bake cookies with the kids, letting them make a mess of the kitchen with flour and sprinkles. We'd drive around looking at Christmas lights in the neighborhoods where people could afford the big displays, drinking hot chocolate from a thermos and singing along to carols on the radio. Thomas would cut down a tree from the lot near the elementary school, always picking one that was a little crooked or sparse on one side because those were cheaper. We'd decorate it together, using the same ornaments year after year, some store-bought from when we first got married, many handmade by the kids in school or Sunday school. Emily always insisted on putting the angel on top, even after she got too big for Thomas to lift her that high and had to use the stepladder instead. Danny would arrange the presents underneath, organizing them by size and family member with the same careful precision he applied to everything in his life. On Christmas morning, we'd make the kids wait at the top of the stairs while Thomas started the coffee and I turned on the tree lights. Then we'd let them run down, their pajama feet thundering on the wooden steps, their faces lit up with pure joy. We didn't have much to give them, but what we had was given with love, and they never once complained that they didn't get as much as their friends at school. They understood, in the way children raised in working-class homes understand, that we gave them what we could and that it was enough because it came from us. But families are complex things, aren't they? Even the happiest families have their complications, their conflicts, their deep-running currents of unresolved issues. Danny and Emily loved each other as children do, but they were also rivals in the way siblings often are. He was the responsible one, the rule follower, the child who brought home perfect report cards and never got in trouble. She was the creative one, the boundary pusher, the child who questioned everything and never met an authority she didn't want to challenge. As they grew older, those differences became more pronounced. Danny was student council president in high school, captain of the baseball team, the kind of kid who made parents proud in obvious, easy-to-recognize ways. Emily was in the drama club, always fighting with her directors about how scenes should be played, getting detention for arguing with teachers about assignments she thought were pointless. Danny went to community college and then to a state university, studying business because it was practical and would lead to a stable job. Emily went to nursing school because she wanted to help people. But she struggled with the rigid rules and hierarchies of the medical profession. Thomas and I loved them equally but differently, the way you have to love children who are fundamentally different people. We supported Danny's achievements and tried to guide him toward humility and compassion, worried sometimes that his perfectionism would make him harsh. We supported Emily's passion and tried to teach her that sometimes you have to work within the system to change it, worried that her rebellious streak would get her hurt. We did our best. God knows we did our best. But there were tensions even then, small fault lines that we didn't recognize as dangerous until much later. Danny thought we were too lenient with Emily, letting her get away with things he would have been punished for. Emily thought we favored Danny, that we were prouder of his conventional successes than her unconventional strengths. We tried to reassure them both, to make them understand that love isn't a finite resource that gets divided up like slices of pie. But children don't always hear what you're trying to tell them, especially when they're working through their own insecurities and trying to figure out who they are. As adults, they remained different. Danny married Jennifer, a sweet girl from a good family, and they had 2 children, Emma and Jacob, and built a life in Charlotte that was comfortable and stable. He went into construction management, following in his father's footsteps, but with more education and better opportunities than Thomas had ever had. He bought a nice house in a good neighborhood, drove a reliable car, saved for retirement, did everything right according to the conventional definition of success. Emily's path was rockier. She married young to a man who seemed charming, but turned out to be controlling and emotionally distant. She had 1 daughter, Sarah, who became the light of her life. She worked as a nurse in Atlanta, pouring her energy into her patients and her daughter, trying to make the best of a marriage that was slowly suffocating her. When she finally got divorced, Danny was judgmental about it in ways that hurt her deeply. He didn't say much, but what he did say suggested that he thought she'd given up too easily, that she should have tried harder to make it work for Sarah's sake. Thomas and I tried to stay neutral, to love and support both of our children without taking sides. But it was hard. We could see both perspectives. We understood Danny's concern for tradition and stability, his worry that divorce would harm his niece. We also understood Emily's need to escape a relationship that was making her miserable, her determination to model self-respect for her daughter, even if it meant being a single parent. We tried to tell them that they were both right in their own ways, that life isn't black and white, that family means accepting each other's choices even when you don't fully understand them. But then Thomas got sick. Cancer, aggressive and unforgiving, diagnosed when he was only 68 years old. We thought we'd have more time. We thought we'd grow old together, watching our grandchildren graduate from high school and college, maybe even meeting great-grandchildren someday. We thought we had years left, not months. The diagnosis came in early 2016, in February, when the mountains were still gray with winter and the cold seemed to seep into your bones, no matter how many layers you wore. Thomas started treatment immediately, chemotherapy that made him weak and nauseous, radiation that burned his skin, clinical trials that gave us hope and then took it away. Danny and Emily both came home as often as they could, taking turns sitting with their father in the hospital, bringing him books and magazines he was too tired to read, just being present in case he wanted to talk. Those months were a blur of medical appointments and insurance paperwork and sleepless nights listening to Thomas struggle to breathe. He was so strong, my husband, so determined to beat this thing that was eating him alive from the inside. He kept working almost until the end, going to job sites even when he could barely stand, because he said he needed to feel useful. He kept making plans for the future, talking about projects he wanted to finish, places he wanted to visit once he got better. He never stopped fighting, right up until the very end. He died in November of 2016, on a Thursday morning just as the sun was coming up over the mountains. I was holding his hand, telling him it was okay to let go, that I would be fine, even though I had no idea if that was true. Danny and Emily were both there, standing on either side of the hospital bed, crying quietly as their father took his last breath and then didn't take another. The silence that followed felt infinite, like the whole world had stopped to acknowledge that Thomas Collins, a good man who worked hard and loved his family, had left it forever. The funeral was beautiful in the way that funerals can be when a lot of people love the person who died. The church was packed with friends and colleagues and neighbors, people whose lives Thomas had touched through his work or his kindness, or just his steady, reliable presence in their community. People told stories about him, funny ones about pranks he'd pulled on construction sites, touching ones about times he'd helped someone in need, simple ones about what a good man he was. I sat in the front pew between my children, holding their hands, trying to absorb the reality that I was a widow now, that the life I'd built with Thomas was over, and a new life, one I hadn't chosen and didn't want, was beginning. And that's when the trouble started. Not dramatically at first, just small disagreements about funeral arrangements, about what Thomas would have wanted, about how to handle his business affairs. Danny wanted everything done properly, legally, by the book. Emily wanted things handled quickly, so we could all start to heal. They snapped at each other during the reception at the house, arguing over details that didn't really matter, whether the obituary should mention his military service, even though he'd barely served 6 months before a medical discharge, whether we should have buried him in the family plot, or cremated him the way he'd once mentioned in passing. I tried to mediate, but I was too deep in my own grief to be effective. The real break came during the settling of the estate. Thomas had a will, thank God, so there wasn't ambiguity about what he wanted. He'd left everything to me, with the understanding that when I died, everything would be split equally between Danny and Emily. It was simple and fair and exactly what you'd expect. But the house, our house on Oakland Street, had increased in value over the years. And the business, even in a modest form, had some equity. There were decisions to be made about whether to sell the business or keep it running, whether I should stay in the house or downsize to something more manageable, whether to cash out retirement accounts or let them continue to grow. Danny had opinions about all of it. He thought I should sell the house and move into a smaller place, invest the proceeds wisely for my future. He thought the business should be sold to Thomas's partners, who'd made a reasonable offer. He had spreadsheets and projections showing me how these decisions would impact my financial security and eventually their inheritance. He meant well. I know he did. He was trying to protect me, trying to ensure I'd be taken care of in my old age. But Emily saw it differently. She thought Danny was trying to manage the estate like it was a business deal rather than their father's legacy. She thought he cared more about money than about what Thomas would have wanted or what would make me happy. She accused him of being cold and calculating, of treating their father's death as a financial opportunity rather than a loss to be grieved. She wanted me to keep the house, keep everything the way it was, preserve their father's memory in physical form. They fought about it, loudly, bitterly, using words that cut deep and left scars that wouldn't heal. Danny called Emily irresponsible and impractical, said she'd never understood how to manage money, and that's why her own life was such a mess. Emily called Danny heartless and greedy, said he'd always cared more about appearances than about people, that he'd turned into exactly the kind of judgmental person their father had never been. I tried to referee, tried to make them see that they were both hurting and taking it out on each other instead of facing their grief. But they wouldn't listen. The arguments escalated. They stopped talking to each other directly, only speaking through me. Danny would call and ask about Emily in a tone that made it clear he thought she was being unreasonable. Emily would call and vent about Danny in language I won't repeat even now. And then, in a moment of anger and pain and exhaustion, Emily said something she couldn't take back. She told Danny that their father had been disappointed in him, that Thomas had confided in her that he wished Danny would care less about success and more about people. Whether that was true or not, and I honestly don't know if it was, because Thomas loved both his children and kept his criticisms gentle, it destroyed something fundamental between them. Danny didn't respond with anger. He responded with silence. He hung up the phone and didn't call back. He stopped coming to Sunday dinners. He sent Christmas cards addressed only to me, not to Emily. When I tried to talk to him about it, to convince him to forgive his sister, he said quietly that some things can't be forgiven, that she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Emily was devastated. She'd lashed out in anger, and she regretted it almost immediately. She tried to apologize, tried to reach out, but Danny wouldn't accept it. He'd decided that the relationship was over, and once Danny made a decision, changing his mind was like trying to move a mountain with your bare hands. She stopped trying after a while, pride and hurt hardening into resentment. And I was left in the middle, loving both of my children, unable to fix what was broken between them. For 8 years, I've navigated this impossible situation. I see Danny and his family separately from Emily and Sarah. I celebrate birthdays and graduations and ordinary Sundays divided between them, always conscious that mentioning one to the other creates tension. I've become an expert at editing my conversations, at keeping their lives separate, even though they're both my life. Every Christmas, I hope. I decorate the house the way I always have, using the same ornaments, the same traditions, even though only half the family will ever be there to see it. I set the table for 3 when it should seat 6 or 7. I watch Christmas movies alone and cry at the happy endings where families reconcile, and everyone learns that love is more important than whatever drove them apart. But year after year, nothing changes. Danny comes on Christmas Eve with Jennifer and the kids, bringing thoughtful gifts and staying for exactly 2 hours before heading back to Charlotte. Emily comes on Christmas Day with Sarah, bringing her fierce love and her sadness that things are this way. They never overlap. They never ask about each other anymore. The silence between them has become so normal that I sometimes forget there was a time when they actually liked each other, when they were allies instead of strangers. And I've learned to accept it. Or at least I've learned to pretend to accept it, which is almost the same thing. I've learned not to hope for miracles because hope hurts too much when it's repeatedly disappointed. I've learned to be grateful for what I have, relationships with both of my children, even if those relationships are separate and incomplete. I've learned that sometimes family means loving people from a distance, respecting their choices even when those choices break your heart. This year, though, this Christmas of 2024, I'd reached a new level of resignation. I was 72 years old, living alone in a house full of memories, and I'd made my peace with the idea that this was how things would be for the rest of my life. I'd stopped praying for reconciliation. I'd stopped imagining scenarios where Danny and Emily would somehow work through their differences. I'd stopped hoping for a miracle because after 8 years, it was clear that miracles weren't coming. I was wrong. The Christmas season of 2024 started the way they all did, with me pulling boxes of decorations down from the attic by myself, stringing lights along the porch railing that sagged a little more each year, setting up the same artificial tree we'd bought back in 2003 when the price of fresh trees had gotten too high for my widow's budget. The routine was familiar, almost comforting in its predictability. This is what I do. This is who I am now. A 72-year-old woman going through the motions of celebrating a holiday that hasn't felt genuinely joyful in nearly a decade. I put up the tree on the first Saturday of December, just like always. It took me 3 hours instead of the one it used to take when Thomas was alive to hold the base steady while I adjusted the branches. My hands aren't as strong as they used to be, and my back protests when I bend over for too long. But I got it done, arranging each branch with care, trying to make the sparse spots face the wall where they wouldn't be as noticeable. The ornaments went on next, each one a small stab of memory. The wooden rocking horse Thomas had bought our first Christmas together, when we were so poor we could barely afford groceries, but he'd insisted on getting me something. The construction paper stars Danny had made in 2nd grade, the glitter long since faded, but still recognizable. The tiny nurse's cap Emily had created in a craft class when she was deciding on her career path. The professional photos of Emma, Jacob, and Sarah at various ages, capturing moments of childhood that had passed too quickly. Each ornament was a story, a fragment of a life that used to be whole. I noticed things that year that I'd been ignoring before. The way the house echoed when I walked through it, my footsteps the only sound breaking the silence. The way dust gathered in corners I didn't have the energy to clean anymore. The way the refrigerator was mostly empty because cooking for one seemed pointless when you could just have a sandwich or some soup straight from the can. The way I sometimes went days without speaking to another human being, except the checkout clerk at the grocery store or the pharmacist who filled my blood pressure medication. Getting old alone is different than I thought it would be. I'd always imagined that Thomas and I would age together, that we'd be those couples you see at restaurants celebrating their 50th anniversary, holding hands across the table with skin that's gone thin and spotted, but eyes that still light up when they look at each other. I'd imagined us taking care of each other through the various indignities of aging, the hearing loss, the arthritis, the occasional confusion about where you put your keys or whether you'd already taken your morning pills. I'd imagined us surrounded by children and grandchildren who visited often, who called just to check in, who made us feel connected to the continuing stream of life. Instead, I had phone calls scheduled like business appointments. Danny called every Sunday at 3 o'clock, as regular as clockwork, and we'd talk for exactly 15 minutes about his work, his kids, Jennifer's latest project. The calls were pleasant but surface level, never touching on anything deeper than the weather or what he'd been watching on Netflix. Emily called sporadically, usually late at night when she got off a shift and was driving home, her voice tired but warm as she told me about difficult patients or funny moments with her coworkers. I loved both types of calls, but I also felt the absence of what they weren't: real connection, real intimacy, the kind of conversation where you can talk about the things that actually matter. The grandchildren had their own lives now. Emma was finishing her sophomore year at UNC Chapel Hill, studying environmental science and involved in so many activities I could barely keep track of them all. Jacob was a junior in high school, consumed with college applications and basketball and a girlfriend named Madison. I'd never met, but heard about constantly. Sarah was a freshman at Georgia State, navigating the challenges of college life while also dealing with the aftermath of her parents' divorce, trying to find her place in a world that sometimes felt overwhelming. They texted me occasionally, birthday greetings, quick photos of something that made them think of me, brief updates that I cherished, even though I knew I was one of dozens of people they were keeping loosely in touch with. They weren't bad kids, they weren't neglectful. They were just busy, living their lives, focused on futures that felt urgent and important in ways that an old woman's loneliness couldn't compete with. I'd tried to fill my days with purpose. I volunteered at the elementary school library once a week, reading to children whose faces reminded me of students I'd taught decades ago. I attended my book club every month, discussing novels with women my age who were also mostly widows, also mostly lonely, also mostly just trying to find reasons to leave the house and pretend they were still vital parts of the world. I went to church on Sundays, sitting in the same pew I'd sat in for 40 years, listening to sermons about hope and faith and God's plan, trying to believe them. But Christmas was when the loneliness hit hardest. All around Asheville, families were gathering. Houses were lit up with displays that took weeks to set up. Shopping centers were packed with people buying gifts, their faces anxious but also excited, part of that annual ritual of showing love through carefully chosen presents. Restaurants were filled with office parties and family reunions and friends catching up over holiday drinks. And I was decorating a tree that only I would see most of the time, baking cookies that I'd end up freezing because there was no one to eat them, planning 2 separate Christmas celebrations that would each feel half empty because the people who should be there together would be carefully scheduled to never overlap. This year felt different, though, heavier somehow. Maybe it was my age. 72 is old enough that you start thinking about how many Christmases you have left, how many opportunities remain to see your family, how much time you might have before your own health fails and you become a burden rather than a presence. Maybe it was the accumulation of 8 years of separated celebrations, 8 years of pretending this was fine, 8 years of carrying the weight of my children's estrangement like a stone in my chest. Or maybe it was the dream I'd had a few weeks earlier. I dreamed about Thomas, standing in our kitchen on Christmas morning, coffee cup in hand, smiling at Danny and Emily as they argued playfully about whose turn it was to hand out presents. In the dream, he looked at me and said, "Don't give up, Maggie. Don't ever give up on them." I'd woken up crying, the dream so vivid I could almost smell his cologne, could almost feel his presence in the room. And for a moment, I'd felt hope stirring again, that dangerous emotion I'd tried so hard to bury. But hope is exhausting when it's never fulfilled. Hope requires energy I didn't have anymore, so I pushed it back down, telling myself the dream was just my brain's way of processing grief and loneliness, not some kind of message from beyond or sign that things might change. I planned this year's Christmas celebrations the same way I always did. Danny and his family would come on Christmas Eve for dinner and presents. I'd make pot roast and potatoes, Emily's favorite meal, but I wouldn't mention that because it would only remind everyone who wasn't there. We'd exchange gifts in the living room, and the kids would be polite and grateful, even though nothing I could afford to give them could compete with what their parents bought. Jennifer would help me clean up the kitchen, chatting about her book club and her latest hobby while carefully avoiding any mention of my daughter. They'd leave around 8:30, and I'd be alone again. Then Emily and Sarah would come on Christmas Day for brunch and presents. I'd make French toast and bacon, Danny's favorite breakfast, but I wouldn't mention that either. We'd exchange gifts, and Emily would get emotional because she always did around the holidays, remembering her father and probably also mourning the family that used to be whole. Sarah would talk about college and her roommate drama and the boy she was maybe interested in but wasn't sure about. They'd leave in the early afternoon, and I'd be alone again, with 2 half-celebrated Christmases behind me and nothing ahead but the long winter months. I'd accepted this pattern. I'd learned to live with it. I'd stopped fighting against it because fighting required strength I no longer had. But as December progressed and Christmas Eve drew closer, I noticed something strange. Both of my children seemed distracted when I talked to them on the phone. Danny's usual clockwork Sunday call came at 2:45 instead of 3, and he seemed rushed, like he had something else on his mind. Emily called me 3 times in 1 week, which was unusual, and each time she started to say something and then changed the subject, asking about my day or my health or whether I needed anything. I didn't think much of it. The holidays make everyone stressed and distracted. Everyone has extra responsibilities, extra expectations, extra emotional weight to carry. I figured Danny was busy with work deadlines and holiday preparations. I figured Emily was dealing with the usual nursing chaos that comes when people get sick over the holidays and the hospital is understaffed. On December 22nd, a Sunday, I went through my normal routine. Church in the morning, where Pastor Mike preached about Mary's courage in accepting God's plan, even though it was terrifying and would change her life in ways she couldn't predict. Lunch at home, tomato soup and a grilled cheese sandwich, eaten while standing at the kitchen counter because sitting at the table alone felt too depressing. An afternoon of wrapping presents, using the same paper I'd been rationing for 3 years because it seemed wasteful to buy new stuff when I had perfectly good rolls still half full. I wrapped Danny's family gifts first, a sweater for Jennifer that I'd found on clearance at Belk, a gift card to Barnes & Noble for Emma because she loved books and I had no idea what she'd already read, a basketball training guide for Jacob because that was his passion even though I didn't understand the first thing about the sport. For Danny himself, I'd framed an old photo of him and Thomas working on a construction project together, both of them covered in sawdust, both of them grinning at the camera. Then Emily's family gifts, a set of warm socks for Emily, because nurses were always on their feet and practical gifts were the most loving ones. A gift card to Target for Sarah because college students always needed something. For Emily, I'd put together a photo album of her childhood, carefully arranged with pictures I'd been collecting and organizing for months, hoping she'd see in those images the girl she used to be, confident, joyful, loved. I taped and folded and wrote names on tags, arranging the presents under the tree in careful piles. Danny's family on the left, Emily's family on the right, as if even the geography of gift-giving had to respect the divide between my children. The house looked beautiful, objectively speaking. The tree was lit and decorated. The stockings hung from the mantel, even though they'd remain empty. The kitchen was clean and ready for tomorrow's cooking. The guest bathroom had fresh towels in case anyone needed to use it. Everything was prepared. Everything was in order. Everything was exactly as it should be for a 72-year-old widow celebrating Christmas with a divided family. But it felt hollow. It felt like going through motions that had lost their meaning. It felt like pretending, and I was tired of pretending. That night, I sat in Thomas's old recliner, the one I still couldn't bring myself to get rid of, even though the fabric was worn through in places and the footrest didn't work right anymore. I held a cup of tea that had gone cold while I stared at the Christmas tree, its lights blinking in the pattern they'd blinked for years, its ornaments holding memories that both comforted and hurt. And I let myself feel the full weight of it all. The loneliness, the failure. Because that's what it felt like, a failure. I'd failed to keep my family together. I'd failed to help my children forgive each other. I'd failed to create the kind of home where love was stronger than hurt, where forgiveness was possible, where people could work through their differences instead of letting them calcify into permanent separation. Thomas would have known what to do. He was always better at this than me, better at finding the words that could bridge gaps, better at making people feel heard even when he disagreed with them. He would have found a way to fix this. But Thomas was gone, and I was just one old woman trying to hold together the fragments of a family that didn't want to be whole anymore. I didn't cry. I was beyond crying. I just sat there, drinking cold tea, watching the Christmas lights blink, accepting that some things are broken in ways that can't be fixed, accepting that this was my life now and it would be my life until I died, accepting that miracles don't happen, at least not for people like me. Tomorrow, I'd put on a brave face. I'd cook a nice dinner for Danny's family. I'd smile and laugh and pretend everything was fine. Then on Christmas Day, I'd do it all again for Emily's family. And then it would be over for another year. And I'd take down the decorations and pack them away and try not to think about how many more Christmases I might have left to celebrate alone. I went to bed around 11, later than usual, because there wasn't much point in rushing to sleep when you just wake up to another day of managed loneliness. I said my prayers, something I still did out of habit even though I wasn't sure anyone was listening. I prayed for Danny and his family, for Emily and hers, for all the grandchildren and their futures. I prayed for Thomas, wherever he was, hoping he knew I was still trying, even though I'd failed at the one thing he'd most want me to succeed at, keeping his children together. I didn't pray for a miracle. I'd learned better than that. Christmas Eve dawned cold and clear, the kind of December morning where the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at, and frost still clings to the grass even though it's nearly noon. I was up early out of habit more than necessity, moving through my morning routine with the same careful precision I applied to everything these days. Coffee, shower. Dressed in the red sweater I'd worn every Christmas Eve for the past 10 years because it felt wrong to celebrate in anything else. Hair fixed, lipstick applied even though no one would be here for hours. The pot roast went into the oven at 1 o'clock, along with carrots and potatoes and onions, the same recipe I'd been making since the kids were little. The smell filled the house, rich and savory, and for a moment I could almost pretend it was a normal Christmas, that the whole family would gather around the table together, that there wouldn't be empty chairs and unspoken names hanging in the air between us. I set the table for 6, me, Danny, Jennifer, Emma, and Jacob. 6 places when there should have been 9 if you counted Emily, Sarah, and the grandchild Danny's family would probably have someday when Emma or Jacob got married and started their own families. But I'd learned not to think about what should be and focus instead on what was. The potatoes were peeled and ready to mash. The green beans were in a pot on the stove, just needing to be heated when the time came. The rolls were the frozen kind you bake at the last minute, because making everything from scratch was more than I could manage alone. The table was set with the good china we only used at holidays, the plates with the tiny gold rim that I had to hand wash because they were too delicate for the dishwasher. Everything was ready by 3:30. Danny and his family were due at 5. I had an hour and a half to sit and wait and try not to think too much about how this same scene would repeat tomorrow with different people, how I'd cook a different meal and set the table for 4 instead of 6, and pretend that this bifurcated celebration was normal and fine and not slowly eating away at my heart. I sat in the living room, looking at the tree, thinking about Christmases past. The year Emily had the flu and threw up all over her new doll. The year Danny had gotten up at 4 in the morning because he couldn't wait any longer to see what Santa had brought. The year Thomas had surprised me with a necklace I'd admired in a shop window, spending money we couldn't afford because he wanted to see my face light up. The year we'd all driven to the mountains to see snow and ended up stuck on the side of the road for 3 hours waiting for a tow truck, making the best of it by singing Christmas carols and eating the snacks we'd packed for the trip. Those memories felt both close and impossibly distant, like looking at photographs of people who'd died, recognizing their faces but unable to reconcile the vibrant life in the pictures with the knowledge that they were gone. That family, the whole, happy family, was gone. Dead as surely as Thomas was dead, killed by circumstances and anger and the inability to forgive. At 4:30, my phone rang. Danny's number on the caller ID. For a second my heart dropped, assuming he was calling to cancel, to tell me they couldn't make it, that something had come up. But when I answered, his voice sounded normal, maybe even a little lighter than usual. "Hey, Mom. We're running a few minutes late. Traffic is worse than I expected. We should be there by 5:15, 5:20 at the latest. That okay?" "Of course, honey. Take your time. Be safe on the roads." "We will. See you soon." He hung up before I could say anything else, which was normal for Danny. He was efficient with phone calls, never one for long, chatty conversations. I put the phone down and checked the roast, which was perfect, the meat falling apart at the touch of a fork. I turned it down to keep warm and waited. 5:15 came and went, then 5:20. At 5:30, I started to worry a little, the way mothers always worry when their children are later than expected. I imagined car accidents, traffic jams, some crisis that would prevent them from coming at all. I checked my phone repeatedly, making sure I hadn't missed a call, that the ringer was on, that everything was working. At 5:45, I heard a car pull into the driveway, then another car, which was odd, because Danny's whole family should fit in one vehicle. Maybe Jennifer had driven separately for some reason. Maybe they'd carpooled with someone else who was also running late. I went to the front window and looked out. 2 cars in the driveway, Danny's familiar blue Honda and Emily's gray Toyota. For a second, I thought I was seeing things, that my old eyes were playing tricks on me, that stress and loneliness had finally pushed me over some edge into hallucination. Because Emily wasn't supposed to be here. Emily was coming tomorrow. Emily and Danny were never in the same place anymore, had actively avoided each other for 8 years, had structured their entire lives around never having to be in the same room. But it was definitely her car. I could see the nursing school sticker in the back window, the slight dent in the front bumper from when she'd backed into a pole in the hospital parking garage 3 years ago. My heart started pounding, that rapid flutter that my doctor said was just anxiety but felt like something more dangerous. My hands started shaking. I didn't know what was happening. Had there been some terrible accident I didn't know about? Some emergency that required both of them to come here together? Was someone dying? Was I dying and they decided not to tell me? I watched through the window, unable to move, as car doors opened. Danny got out first, then Jennifer, then the kids. From Emily's car came Emily herself and Sarah, my granddaughter, looking nervous and excited all at once. They stood in the driveway for a moment, all of them, looking at each other in a way that suggested this wasn't random, wasn't an accident, wasn't a crisis. And then Danny said something I couldn't hear through the glass, and Emily responded, and then, and I'm not making this up, this actually happened, they both smiled. Not forced smiles. Not polite social smiles. Real smiles, the kind that reach your eyes and crinkle the corners and come from somewhere genuine inside. I stood frozen at the window, watching my children talk to each other for the first time in 8 years, watching them stand together in my driveway on Christmas Eve like it was the most natural thing in the world, like there wasn't nearly a decade of silence and hurt between them. Jennifer saw me through the window and waved. Then they all started walking toward the front door, together, in a group, like a family. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what this meant. I didn't know if I should be happy or terrified or angry that they'd apparently planned something without telling me. All I knew was that I was 72 years old. I'd been managing my expectations for 8 years. I'd carefully protected my heart from hoping for exactly this scenario. And now it was happening, and I had absolutely no idea how to process it. The doorbell rang. I stood there for another few seconds, paralyzed, before I finally made my feet move toward the door. I reached for the handle, opened it, and there they were, all of them, together. Danny spoke first, his voice thick with emotion I'd never heard from him before, not even at his father's funeral. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Can we come in?" Behind him, Emily was crying. Happy crying, I realized, not sad crying. Sarah was holding her mother's hand and smiling at me with tears in her own eyes. Jennifer had her arm around Emma, who looked like she was about to burst from excitement. Jacob stood a little apart, awkward in the way teenage boys are when emotions run high, but his eyes were bright and his mouth was curved in a genuine smile. "I don't understand," I said, and my voice came out as barely a whisper. "Emily, you're not supposed to be here until tomorrow. What's happening? Is something wrong?" Emily stepped forward, and before I could process what was happening, she wrapped her arms around me. "Nothing's wrong, Mama. Everything's finally right. Can we please come in? We have so much to tell you." I stepped back, still confused, still not understanding, but my body went into automatic hostess mode, welcoming them in, taking coats, offering drinks, moving through familiar patterns, even though my brain was trying to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. They filed into the living room, and instead of the careful separation I'd expected, Danny's family on one side, Emily on the other, they all sat together. Danny on the couch next to Emily, Jennifer in the armchair with Emma perched on the arm, Sarah on the floor with Jacob, like they did this all the time, like they were comfortable with each other, like they were family. I stood in the doorway, still holding Jennifer's coat, staring at them. "Somebody better tell me what's going on right now, because I'm about 2 seconds away from calling 911 to check if I'm having a stroke." They laughed, all of them, together. And then Danny and Emily started talking, sometimes finishing each other's sentences, telling me a story I never could have imagined. "It started about 2 months ago," Danny began, looking at Emily as if asking permission to continue. She nodded, encouraging him. "Jennifer and I were at a restaurant in Charlotte. Emma had just gotten back from a college trip, and we were celebrating, and we ran into Sarah." Sarah picked up the story, her young voice confident despite the emotion behind it. "I was there with some friends from Georgia State. We were in Charlotte for a concert, and I saw Uncle Danny." She paused, and I realized it was the first time I'd heard her call him that in years. I saw Uncle Danny across the restaurant, and for a second I thought about pretending I didn't see him. But then I thought about how stupid that was. He's my uncle. I love him. And I was tired of pretending I didn't. "She came over to our table," Jennifer continued, her eyes misty. "And she said hello, and Danny froze. I could see him trying to figure out what to do, whether to be polite and distant or just acknowledge her and move on. But then Emma stood up and hugged her cousin, and Jacob did too, and suddenly Danny didn't have a choice but to deal with the situation. "We talked," Sarah said simply. "Just small talk at first. School, life, nothing deep. But then my friends left to go to the bathroom, and it was just me and Uncle Danny and Aunt Jennifer and Emma and Jacob. And Emma asked me how Mom was doing. Emily's voice was soft when she spoke. Sarah called me that night. She was crying. She told me she'd seen Danny, that Emma and Jacob had asked about me, that they'd seemed to genuinely care. And she said, "Mom, I don't even know my cousins. I don't know Uncle Danny, and that's not fair. None of this is fair." I couldn't sleep that night, Danny admitted. Jennifer and I stayed up talking until 3 a.m. About the fight, about the funeral, about everything that had happened. And she asked me a question I'd been avoiding for 8 years. She asked me if I was happier now than I was before, if cutting Emily out of my life had actually made things better or just different. "What did you answer?" I asked, my voice barely audible. I told her the truth, that I wasn't happier, that I'd been angry, and that anger had felt righteous and justified, but that it had also poisoned everything. Every Christmas, every family gathering, every time one of the kids asked why Aunt Emily wasn't there, it was a reminder of something broken that I was choosing to keep broken. Emily reached over and took Danny's hand. It was such a simple gesture, but I gasped when I saw it. These were my children, touching each other with affection, with connection, with the kind of sibling bond I'd thought was lost forever. "Danny called me a week later," Emily said. I almost didn't answer. I saw his name on my phone, and I thought, this has to be about Mom. Something must be wrong. But I answered, and he said, "Em, can we talk? Really talk?" "We met halfway," Danny said. "There's a diner in Spartanburg that's basically equidistant from Charlotte and Atlanta. We sat in a booth for 4 hours and just talked. Really talked, for the first time since Dad died." "What did you talk about?" I asked, still trying to process all of this, still waiting for the other shoe to drop, for this to somehow be a dream or a mistake or something that would fall apart as quickly as it had apparently come together. "Everything," Emily said. "The funeral, the estate, the things we'd said to each other, the things we'd left unsaid, our hurt, our anger, our regret. We didn't solve everything in one conversation. We didn't suddenly agree about everything. But we did something we should have done 8 years ago. We listened to each other." "I realized," Danny said slowly, "that I'd been so focused on being right that I'd forgotten to be kind. I'd held on to what Em said about Dad being disappointed in me, and I'd used that hurt as permission to cut her out completely. But the truth is, even if Dad had said that to her, and we still don't know if he did, it didn't give me the right to respond with 8 years of silence. And I realized," Emily added, "that I'd said something cruel in a moment of grief and pain, and instead of really apologizing, instead of acknowledging how much I'd hurt my brother, I'd let pride get in the way. I'd tried to apologize once, and when he didn't immediately accept it, I decided it was his problem, not mine. But it was both of our problems. We both had to choose to fix it." Jennifer spoke up. "They met 3 more times over the next month. Sometimes I was there, sometimes it was just the 2 of them. They worked through things. They argued sometimes, but they also laughed. They remembered Dad together, shared stories about him that they'd been keeping separate for years. And slowly, I watched my husband become less burdened, less angry, more like the person I'd married. Sarah and I drove to Charlotte 2 weeks ago," Emily said. "We all had dinner together. Me and Sarah, Danny and Jennifer and Emma and Jacob. It was awkward at first, like meeting strangers who you're supposed to love. But then Emma told a funny story about her roommate, and Sarah told one back, and suddenly they were just 2 young women finding out they actually liked each other. We decided we wanted to do something for you," Danny said, looking directly at me. "We realized that for 8 years, you've been carrying the weight of our fight. You've been splitting yourself in half, celebrating everything twice, never able to have your whole family together because we were too stubborn and hurt to forgive each other. We decided," Emily continued, "that the best Christmas present we could give you wasn't something we bought. It was us, together, healed, or at least healing. "We planned this about a week ago," Sarah explained. "We were all texting in a group chat, me and Emma and Jacob, and we realized that Grandma had no idea we'd been talking. None of us had told you because we wanted it to be a surprise." "Are you surprised?" Jacob asked, speaking for the first time, his teenage voice cracking slightly on the words. I tried to answer, but nothing came out. Because I was crying. Not delicate tears that run prettily down your cheeks. Big, ugly, sobbing tears that made my whole body shake. I put my hands over my face because I didn't want them to see me fall apart, but I couldn't stop it. And then they were all around me. Arms wrapping around me from every direction. Danny on one side, Emily on the other. Jennifer's hand on my shoulder. The grandkids all piling in, creating this cocoon of family, of love, of everything I'd thought was lost forever. "We're sorry, Mom," Danny said, his own voice breaking. "We're so sorry we put you through this for so long." "We love you," Emily added, "and we love each other. We forgot that for a while, but we remember now." We stood there like that for I don't know how long, crying together, holding each other, being family in a way we hadn't been since Thomas died. The pot roast was probably drying out in the oven. The potatoes were going cold. The carefully set table for 6 would need to be reset for 9. None of it mattered. When we finally pulled apart, when the tears had slowed enough that we could actually see each other clearly, I looked at my children, my beautiful, flawed, hurting, healing children, and I said the only thing I could think of. "Merry Christmas, my babies. Merry Christmas." Danny smiled, that real smile I hadn't seen in so long. "Merry Christmas, Mom," Emily echoed him. "Merry Christmas, Mama." And then, because someone had to acknowledge the practical reality of the situation, Jennifer said, "Should we reset the table? Because unless I'm mistaken, there's a pot roast in the oven that's supposed to feed 6, and we now have 9 people here." I laughed, the sound coming out watery and strange after all the crying. "We'll make it work. We always make it work. That's what families do." The rest of Christmas Eve was chaos in the best possible way. We reset the table, adding 3 more places, squeezing chairs together so we'd all fit. I pulled out every side dish I had planned for tomorrow's brunch with Emily, supplementing the pot roast that would now have to stretch further than I'd planned. We raided the refrigerator and the pantry, finding things to add to the meal. A salad, some pasta I could make quickly, the rolls I'd bought extra of just in case. The kids, Emma, Jacob, and Sarah, worked together in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and setting out dishes, talking and laughing in a way that suggested they'd already formed their own bonds during the weeks they'd been secretly reconnecting. They had inside jokes I didn't understand, references to conversations I hadn't been part of. It should have made me feel left out, but instead it filled me with joy. My grandchildren were family to each other again. They were cousins, not strangers. Danny and Emily sat at the kitchen table while we all cooked, and I couldn't stop looking at them. They were talking about Emily's job at the hospital, about a particularly difficult patient she'd had last week, and Danny was listening with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions, being present in a way he'd never been able to be when we'd talk about her in the abstract. Jennifer moved around the kitchen with the ease of someone who'd been in this house 1,000 times, finding things without asking where they were, helping me in the practiced way that comes from years of shared family meals. But there was something different in her eyes too, a lightness, a relief. I realized that she'd been carrying the weight of this estrangement too, trying to support her husband while also maintaining some relationship with me, navigating the impossible politics of a divided family. At some point during the meal preparation, Sarah asked me about a recipe, and I started explaining how my mother had made this particular dish. And then Emily chimed in with a memory of her grandmother that I'd forgotten, and then Danny added his own memory, and suddenly we were all sharing stories about Thomas and about my parents and about Christmases past. We talked about the year the tree fell over because we decorated it too heavily on one side. We talked about the year Emily had insisted on wearing her Halloween costume to Christmas dinner because she loved it so much. We talked about the year Danny had saved up his allowance to buy Thomas a special screwdriver set, and had been so excited to give it to him that he'd wrapped it 3 times just so the opening would last longer. We talked about Thomas constantly, weaving him into the conversation in a way that felt natural instead of painful. For 8 years, I'd been afraid to mention him too much around Danny because it seemed to hurt him, and afraid to mention him too much around Emily because she'd get defensive about things he supposedly said. But now, with both of them here together, we could share him again. We could remember him as the complex, loving, flawed man he was, instead of the weapon they'd been using against each other. Dinner took twice as long to prepare as it should have, but nobody minded. We were making up for lost time, filling the house with noise and laughter and the kind of comfortable chaos that comes from multiple people working together toward a common goal. When we finally sat down to eat, squeezing around the table that was definitely too small for 9 people, I looked around at their faces and felt something I hadn't felt in 8 years. Wholeness, completeness. The sense that everyone who was supposed to be here was here, that there weren't empty chairs haunting us with their absence. Danny stood up, holding his water glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he said. "To Mom, who never stopped loving us even when we made it really hard, who kept showing up for both of us separately when what she wanted most was to have us together, who taught us, through her example, what it means to love unconditionally, even when that love isn't easy or convenient." Emily stood too, raising her own glass. "To Mom, who deserved better than what we gave her, who sacrificed her own happiness to accommodate our stubbornness, who never gave up on us even when we'd given up on each other." "To Grandma," Emma added, and then all the kids stood too, raising their glasses. "To family," Jennifer said, "to second chances, to forgiveness, to being brave enough to admit when you're wrong and humble enough to make it right." I couldn't speak. I just raised my glass with shaking hands and nodded, tears streaming down my face again, unable to believe this was real, that this was actually happening, that my family was whole again. We clinked glasses, that cheerful sound of glass on glass that represents celebration and connection and joy. And then we ate, passing dishes back and forth, reaching across each other, talking over each other in the way families do when everyone wants to share something and nobody wants to wait their turn. The food was good, but it could have been cardboard, and I wouldn't have noticed. What mattered was the people around the table, the sound of their voices, the way Danny and Emily sat next to each other and occasionally bumped shoulders or laughed at the same joke. What mattered was Emma explaining her college major to Sarah and Sarah sharing advice about navigating financial aid. What mattered was Jacob telling Danny about a construction project he was working on for his shop class, his uncle listening with the focused attention of someone who understood the subject and cared about the person explaining it. After dinner, we moved to the living room for presents. I'd planned to give out gifts the way I always did, carefully organized by family group. But the kids mixed it all up, handing things out randomly, creating chaos that somehow felt right. "Wait," I said, suddenly panicking. "I don't have gifts for everyone. I didn't know you'd all be here together. I didn't plan for—" "Mom," Danny interrupted gently, "we don't care about presents. Being here together is the present. Everything else is just extra." But they'd brought presents for each other. Danny had gifts for Emily and Sarah. Emily had gifts for Danny's family. The grandkids had clearly coordinated, bringing things for their cousins. It was beautiful and chaotic and absolutely perfect. I watched Sarah open a gift from Emma, a framed photo of the two of them from when they were little, maybe 6 and 9 years old, at a family beach trip before everything fell apart. Sarah started crying when she saw it. "I forgot we were friends once," she said. "I forgot we used to play together." "I didn't forget," Emma said softly. "I just didn't know how to fix it." "Me either," Sarah admitted, "but I'm glad we're fixing it now." Jacob gave both his cousins matching t-shirts with some kind of inside joke on them that made all three kids laugh hysterically while the adults looked on in confusion. It didn't matter that we didn't get the joke. What mattered was that they had inside jokes again, that they were building new memories together. Danny gave Emily a small box, and when she opened it, she gasped. Inside was a bracelet, simple silver, nothing fancy, but engraved with a date. November 15th, 2016, the day their father died. "I had it made a few weeks ago," Danny said quietly. "I wanted you to have something that acknowledged that we both lost him, that we both hurt, that our grief was real even if we expressed it differently. I'm sorry I couldn't see that before." Emily clutched the bracelet to her chest, crying again. "I'm sorry too. I'm sorry for what I said. I don't even know if Dad said that to me or if I imagined it in my grief. But even if he did, I should never have used it as a weapon against you. You were a good son. You are a good son." They hugged again, and I realized that watching my children forgive each other was better than any present anyone could have given me. This was the gift. This moment. This healing. Emily gave Danny a similar gift. A framed photo of the two of them as children, sitting on their father's lap while he read them a book. They couldn't have been more than 5 and 8 in the picture, both leaning against Thomas, both completely secure in the knowledge that they were loved and safe. Under the photo, Emily had written, "This is who we are. This is who we'll always be, even when we forget. Love, your sister." Danny stared at the photo for a long time before looking up at Emily. "Thank you," he said simply. "I'd forgotten this version of us existed." "Me too," she admitted. "But it did, and it can again. Not exactly the same, because we're different people now, but something like it. Something real." As the evening wore on, we sang Christmas carols, badly, because none of us could carry a tune except Jennifer. We played charades, teams mixing family units, creating new alliances and connections. We ate cookies and drank hot chocolate and told more stories about Christmases past. Around 10 o'clock, Emma asked if we could watch the old home videos. I'd converted most of our VHS tapes to digital a few years ago, a project that had taken months and had made me cry countless times as I watched my young family moving through their lives, unknowing of what was coming. I set up the laptop connected to the TV, and we watched Christmas mornings from the 1980s and 1990s. Danny and Emily as children, ripping open presents with wild abandon. Thomas in his flannel pajamas, operating the video camera with running commentary that made us all laugh. Me in the background, younger and less tired, managing the chaos with apparent ease. "Look how little we were," Emily marveled, watching her 6-year-old self struggle with wrapping paper. "Look how much Dad loved this," Danny said, his voice thick with emotion. "Look how happy he was just filming us being idiots." "You weren't idiots," I protested. "You were children. You were perfect." "We're not perfect now either," Emily said, "but we're trying." "That's all we can do," Danny agreed. "Just keep trying." The kids eventually started falling asleep. Sarah curled up in an armchair, Emma and Jacob sharing the couch with their heads at opposite ends. The adults stayed awake longer, talking in lower voices so we wouldn't wake them, marveling at how the evening had unfolded, how something we'd thought was broken forever had somehow been repaired. Around midnight, Jennifer suggested they should probably head back to their hotel. "Hotel?" I said, confused. "You're staying in a hotel? Why? Stay here. All of you stay here." "Mom, we can't all fit," Danny protested. "You don't have enough space." "We'll make space. We have air mattresses, sleeping bags. The kids can camp out in the living room. You and Jennifer can have your old room. Emily and Sarah can have Emily's old room. We'll make it work." "Are you sure?" Emily asked. "That's a lot of people." "I've been alone for 8 years," I said firmly. "I have plenty of room and not enough people to fill it. Stay. Please stay. Let's have Christmas morning together. A real Christmas morning, all of us, like we used to. They looked at each other, Danny and Emily, Jennifer and Emily, the whole group of them silently communicating in the way families do. And then they nodded. "Okay," Danny said. "We'll stay." "We'll go get our overnight bags from the cars," Jennifer added. "We might have packed a few things, just in case." I laughed, realizing they'd planned for this possibility. They'd hoped I'd want them to stay. They'd prepared for a scenario that meant Christmas morning together. We spent the next hour setting up sleeping arrangements, pulling out air mattresses and extra blankets, transforming the living room into a makeshift dormitory. The kids thought it was hilarious, treating it like a camping trip, arguing playfully about who got which spot. By 1 a.m, everyone was settled. The house was full of sleeping people. Their gentle breathing and occasional snores creating a symphony of presence that I'd missed so desperately for so long. I lay in my own bed, unable to sleep despite being exhausted, just listening to the sounds of my family filling my home. Thomas's pillow next to mine was empty, as it had been for 8 years. But the house wasn't empty. My heart wasn't empty. I thought about the dream I'd had weeks earlier, Thomas telling me not to give up. I thought about all the prayers I'd stopped praying because they seemed pointless. I thought about hope, about miracles, about the unpredictable ways that healing can happen when you least expect it. And I realized something important. This miracle, my children reuniting, my family healing, had started not with me, but with them. With Sarah's courage to approach her uncle in a restaurant, with Emma's warmth toward her cousin, with Danny's willingness to question his own righteousness, with Emily's humility to admit she'd been wrong, with all of them choosing, slowly and imperfectly, to forgive. I'd been so focused on my own powerlessness, my own inability to fix what was broken, that I'd forgotten that some things can only be fixed by the people who broke them. My job wasn't to force reconciliation. My job was to keep loving them both, keep showing up, keep holding space for the possibility of healing, even when that possibility seemed impossibly remote. I'd done that. For 8 years, I'd done that. And now, finally, that stubborn love was bearing fruit. I fell asleep sometime around 2, smiling despite my tiredness, grateful beyond words for this impossible, wonderful, miraculous Christmas Eve. Christmas morning arrived with the sound of children's laughter, a sound I hadn't heard in my house on Christmas Day in 8 years. I woke to find sunlight streaming through my bedroom window and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. When I made my way downstairs in my bathrobe, I found Jennifer and Emily working together to make breakfast, chatting like old friends, like the in-law relationship that should have continued developing, but had been frozen for nearly a decade. The kids were already up, sitting around the living room in their pajamas, looking at their phones and talking softly so as not to wake the adults who were still sleeping. Except I could hear Danny's voice from the kitchen too, apparently having been recruited to help with breakfast. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said when he saw me, coming over to hug me. "Did you sleep okay?" "Better than I have in years," I admitted. "How are you feeling this morning? After everything from yesterday?" "Good," he said, and he sounded surprised by his own answer. "Really good, actually. Like something heavy I've been carrying around finally got put down." "That's called unforgiveness," I said gently. "It's heavy, and we convince ourselves we need to carry it, but we don't. It's okay to put it down." "I know that now," he agreed. "I wish I'd figured it out 8 years ago." "You figured it out when you figured it out," I told him. "That's all we can ever do." Emily came over then, giving me her own Christmas morning hug. "Thank you for letting us all stay. I forgot how nice it is to wake up in this house on Christmas morning, how much I missed it." "You're always welcome here," I told her. "Both of you are, always. I know you know that, but I want to say it anyway. This is your home. It will always be your home." Breakfast was pancakes and bacon and eggs, far too much food for 9 people, but somehow we managed to eat most of it anyway. We sat around the table again, squeezing in just like we had at dinner, and it felt even more natural than it had the night before. The awkwardness was gone. The careful politeness had been replaced with genuine comfort. After breakfast, we opened the presents I'd planned to give out today, the ones intended for Emily and Sarah. But I also had a few things I'd been saving, gifts I'd bought over the years when I'd see something perfect for Danny, but couldn't give it to him on Christmas because Emily would be here, or things perfect for Emily that I couldn't give her because Danny was here. I pulled out a box from the back of my closet full of wrapped presents with tags that said things like, "For Danny, Christmas 2019, or "For Emily, Christmas 2021. I couldn't help myself, I explained, embarrassed. I'd see something and think one of you would love it, and I'd buy it. But then I couldn't figure out when to give it to you without making the other feel bad, so I just saved them. There were 8 years of Christmas presents in that box, books I'd thought Danny would like, a scarf I'd seen that was Emily's favorite color. Small things, inexpensive things, but things chosen with love and stored with hope that someday, maybe, I'd be able to give them in the right context. They opened them together, Danny and Emily, pulling out gifts from years past, laughing and crying as they saw the dates on the tags, realizing how long I'd been hoping for this exact scenario. "You never stopped believing we'd figure it out," Emily said, holding a cookbook from 2017 that I'd bought because she'd mentioned wanting to learn to make French pastries. "I stopped believing," I confessed, "especially this year. I'd made peace with things being the way they were. But I guess some part of me kept hoping anyway, even when my conscious mind had given up." After presents, after more food, after hours of just being together, the conversation turned serious again. We were all sitting in the living room, the wrapping paper cleaned up, the kids playing a video game that I didn't understand, but that had them all engaged and cooperating. "I think we need to talk about how we move forward," Danny said, "about what this looks like going forward. I don't want to go back to how things were. I can't." "Me neither," Emily agreed. "But I also don't want to pretend the last 8 years didn't happen. We can't just erase them." "No," I said, "but we can learn from them. We can be honest about what happened and why, and use that knowledge to build something stronger." "I think we need some ground rules," Jennifer suggested. "Agreements about how we handle conflict, how we communicate, how we make sure this doesn't happen again." We spent the next hour talking about exactly that, about how they'd each commit to talking directly to each other instead of through me, about how they'd make an effort to include each other in major family events, about how they'd work on building relationships between their children, making sure the cousins stayed connected, about how they'd honor their father's memory together instead of separately. "I want to visit Dad's grave together," Emily said suddenly. "I've been going alone, or sometimes with Sarah. I've seen evidence that you visit too, Danny. Fresh flowers when I know I didn't leave them. But I want to go together. I want to stand there with you and remember him as our father, not as separate people who happen to share a parent." "I'd like that," Danny said quietly. "I'd really like that." "Maybe we could start a new tradition," Sarah suggested. "Something we do every year, together." "Like what?" I asked. "Like a summer trip," Emma proposed. "All of us. Somewhere we've never been. No pressure, no specific expectations, just time together building new memories." "Or a monthly family dinner," Jacob added. "Taking turns hosting, getting to know each other again." "Those are wonderful ideas," I said. "All of them. We don't have to decide right now what we'll do. We just need to commit to staying connected, to making the effort, to not letting distance or busyness or minor conflicts drive us apart again." "We need to be honest with each other," Emily said, "about everything. If something bothers us, we say it. If we're hurt, we say it. We don't let things fester and grow until they become insurmountable." "And we need to assume good intentions," Danny added. "When one of us says or does something that hurts, we need to assume they didn't mean to cause harm and talk about it instead of assuming the worst. We need to forgive quickly," I said. Not just the big things, but the small things. The forgotten phone calls, the missed birthdays, the times when life gets busy and we drop the ball. We need to extend grace to each other because we're all imperfect and we'll all mess up. Agreed, they both said. Later that afternoon, as Christmas Day was turning toward evening and people were starting to think about heading home, we all gathered on the front porch for a photo. All 9 of us, 3 generations, squeezed together in front of the Christmas wreath on my door. Jennifer set up her phone on a tripod and set the timer, then ran to join us. We smiled at the camera, our arms around each other, our faces showing the marks of tears and laughter and the exhaustion that comes from heavy emotional work. When we looked at the photo afterward, I was struck by how right it looked, how complete. This was what a family photo should look like, messy and imperfect and full of people who love each other despite their flaws. Send that to me, I told Jennifer. I want to print it and frame it. I want to look at it every day and remember that miracles do happen, even when you stop believing in them. As they got ready to leave, Danny's family heading back to Charlotte, Emily and Sarah back to Atlanta, there were more hugs, more tears, more promises to stay in touch, to not let weeks go by without talking, to visit more often. Thank you, I told both of my children as I hugged them goodbye. Thank you for being brave enough to do the hard work of reconciliation. Thank you for giving me this gift. Thank you for giving yourselves this gift. Thank you for never giving up on us, Danny said, even when we'd given up on each other. Thank you for showing us what unconditional love looks like, Emily added. We'll try to do better at showing that to each other. I stood on the porch and waved as both cars pulled out of the driveway, watching until they turned the corner and disappeared from view. Then I went back inside to a house that was once again quiet and empty, but somehow didn't feel lonely anymore. The dishes from our shared meals were still in the sink. The extra blankets and air mattresses were piled in the corner, needing to be put away. There was evidence everywhere of the chaos of 9 people celebrating together. Abandoned coffee cups, forgotten phone chargers, a stuffed animal one of the kids had won in a game and left on the couch. I could have seen it as a mess that needed cleaning. Instead, I saw it as evidence of life, of family, of presence. I saw it as proof that the last 2 days had really happened, that they weren't just some elaborate dream my lonely brain had conjured up. I sat in Thomas's old recliner, looking at the Christmas tree with its mismatched ornaments and twinkling lights, and I talked to him the way I often did when I was alone. You'd be proud of them, I said out loud to the empty room. They finally figured it out. They found their way back to each other. I wish you could have seen it, wish you could have been here. But I think maybe you were, in some way. I think maybe you've been working on this from wherever you are, nudging them toward healing, helping them find the courage to forgive. I imagined I could feel his presence, not in any supernatural way, just in the way that people we love stay with us even after they're gone. Their values, their lessons, their influence. It continues shaping us, and those we love long after they've left this world. The weeks after Christmas were different than I expected. I'd thought maybe Danny and Emily would reconcile on Christmas and then slowly drift back to their separate lives. The reunion being a beautiful moment that didn't fundamentally change anything. I'd been afraid to hope for more than that, afraid to expect sustained healing instead of just a temporary ceasefire. But I was wrong. They meant it when they said they wanted to rebuild their relationship. They meant it when they said they were committed to being family again. Danny called Emily the week after Christmas, just to check in. Not through me, not with me as an intermediary, but directly. He told me about it later, how awkward the first few minutes had been, how they'd both struggled to find things to talk about beyond the weather and work, how they'd both been trying so hard that it almost became harder. But they stuck with it. And by the end of the call, they were laughing about something stupid one of the kids had said. Emily drove to Charlotte 2 weeks later, meeting Danny and Jennifer for lunch. It was supposed to be just a quick meal, maybe an hour. They stayed for 3 hours, talking about everything and nothing, starting to rebuild the friendship that had existed before the estrangement. The grandkids stayed in touch too. Sarah, Emma, and Jacob created a group chat where they sent each other memes and updates about their lives. They started a tradition of video calling every Sunday evening, just 15 or 20 minutes of catching up, but it was connection, it was relationship, it was them choosing to be family. For me, the biggest change was that I could talk to both of my children about each other. I could tell Danny what was happening in Emily's life without him changing the subject. I could tell Emily about Danny's work projects without her getting defensive or quiet. I could share my grandchildren's accomplishments with all of them instead of carefully parceling out information based on which parent I was talking to. In February, we all went to Thomas's grave together for what would have been his 76th birthday. All 9 of us stood around his headstone, and we each shared a memory. Danny talked about learning to use power tools. Emily talked about her dad teaching her to drive. Jennifer shared a story about Thomas giving her advice when she and Danny were engaged. The kids talked about their grandfather the way young people do, with fondness but also with that distance that comes from having been too young when he died to really know him as anything but a grandfather. I talked about our first Christmas together, how poor we'd been, how happy we'd been anyway. How Thomas had given me hope when I was afraid, had made me laugh when I was tired, had loved me through all the phases of life, young and poor, middle-aged and struggling, older and more comfortable. I talked about how much I missed him, but also how grateful I was for every year we'd had. He'd be so proud of you two, I told Danny and Emily, for finding your way back to each other, for being brave enough to forgive, for choosing love over hurt. We planted flowers around his grave, daffodils that would come up every spring, a living memorial that would bloom year after year. It felt right, doing this together, caring for this small plot of earth that held the body of the man who'd brought us all together in the first place. In March, we had our first official family dinner at Danny and Jennifer's house. Emily and Sarah drove up from Atlanta, and we all crowded around their dining room table, sharing a meal that Jennifer and Emily had planned together over multiple phone calls. The kids seemed completely comfortable with each other now, the awkwardness of those first interactions completely gone, replaced with the easy camaraderie of cousins who genuinely liked each other. During dinner, Emma announced that she was changing her major from environmental science to nursing. "Sarah inspired me," she said, looking at her cousin. "Hearing about her work at the hospital, seeing how much she cares about her patients, it made me realize that's what I want to do too. I want to help people in that direct, hands-on way." Emily started crying happy tears, and Sarah looked proud and pleased and a little embarrassed by the attention. "Nursing is hard," she warned Emma, "but it's so worth it." "You'll be great at it," Emily told her niece. "And if you ever need advice or help studying or just someone to vent to about awful rotations, I'm here." "We both are," Sarah added. "Nursing sisters." I watched this exchange with so much gratitude. These girls, young women really, were building something new together. They were creating a relationship that wasn't just about shared DNA, but about shared interests and genuine care for each other. In April, we planned our summer trip that Sarah had suggested at Christmas. We decided on a beach house in South Carolina for a week in July. Nothing fancy, just a rental that was big enough for all of us, close to the water, affordable enough that we could all contribute to the cost without anyone being stretched too thin financially. Planning it together was its own adventure. We had a group text where we discussed everything from which week to go to what groceries we'd need to who would sleep where. There were disagreements. Danny wanted to go earlier in the month. Emily preferred later. The kids all had different opinions about activities. But we worked through it, compromising and adjusting until we found a plan that worked for everyone. The trip itself was magical. We spent a week swimming and building sandcastles and playing board games when it rained. We cooked together, ate together, stayed up late talking on the porch while the ocean provided background noise. We took long walks on the beach and went mini-golfing and ate too much seafood at local restaurants. There were small conflicts, of course. Jacob and Emma got in an argument about whose turn it was to clean the kitchen. Jennifer and I had different ideas about what time the kids should go to bed. Emily got frustrated when Danny kept trying to plan every activity instead of letting things happen organically. But here's the thing. We dealt with it. We talked about it. We apologized when we were wrong. We compromised. We didn't let small disagreements turn into big resentments. We'd learned that lesson the hard way, and we weren't going to repeat those mistakes. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, the 4 adults sat on the porch with glasses of wine, listening to the waves crash against the shore. The conversation turned to Thomas, the way it often did when we were all together. "I used to be so angry at him," Danny confessed. "After he died, angry that he left us, angry that he didn't fight harder, angry that he wasn't there to help us navigate everything that came after. It felt easier to be angry at him than to face my own grief." "I was angry at him too," Emily admitted, "for different reasons. I felt like he'd loved you more, even though logically I knew that wasn't true. I turned him into this perfect figure that I could never measure up to, and then I used that against you." "He wasn't perfect," I said gently. "He was wonderful, but he was also human. He made mistakes. He had his own struggles, but he loved you both so much, exactly equally, just differently because you were different people." "I know that now," Emily said. "I wish I'd known it then." "We all wish we'd known things then that we know now," Jennifer said wisely. "But we can't change the past. We can only move forward with the wisdom we've gained." "To Thomas," Danny said, raising his wine glass, "who loved us enough to raise us and who would be thrilled to see us all here together now." "To Thomas," we echoed, clinking glasses, honoring the man who'd started this family, whose death had broken it, whose memory had helped heal it. By the time we returned from that trip, I felt like we'd crossed some invisible threshold. We weren't just reconciled anymore. We were actively family again, choosing each other, building new memories together, creating traditions that would carry us forward. As fall approached and then gave way to winter again, I watched my family continue to grow closer. Danny got a promotion at work, and Emily was the first person he called after Jennifer. Emily got an award from her hospital for excellent patient care, and Danny drove to Atlanta for the ceremony. The cousins supported each other through school stress and relationship drama and all the normal challenges of growing up. They still had disagreements. Danny and Emily still had moments where their different approaches to life created friction. But they developed the tools to work through it. They talked instead of shutting down. They apologized instead of stonewalling. They chose connection over being right. In November, we all gathered at my house for Thanksgiving. It was the first major holiday we'd all spent together since that miraculous Christmas nearly a year earlier. We cooked together, laughed together, gave thanks together for this second chance we'd been given. "What are you most grateful for this year?" I asked as we went around the table, each person sharing. When it was Danny's turn, he looked at Emily and said simply, "My sister. I'm grateful I found my way back to my sister." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I'm grateful for my brother, for his willingness to forgive me, for his patience as we figured this out." The kids talked about being grateful for their cousins, for this expanded family they'd gained. Jennifer talked about watching her husband become lighter, happier, more whole. Sarah talked about seeing her mother smile more, stress less, have the family support she'd been missing for so long. When it was my turn, I looked around the table at all their faces, these people I loved more than life itself, and I struggled to find words adequate to express what I felt. "I'm grateful for miracles," I finally said. For the small miracle of Sarah approaching her uncle in a restaurant. For the miracle of Danny being willing to answer when Emily called. For the miracle of all of you choosing to do the hard work of healing. I spent so many years thinking miracles were impossible, that some things were too broken to fix. I'm grateful you proved me wrong. As Christmas 2025 approached, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Last year had been so perfect, so unexpected, so magical. How could this year possibly compare? Would it feel anticlimactic? Would we have built it up too much in our memories? But I realized I was thinking about it all wrong. Last year was special because it was unexpected, because it was reconciliation, because it was healing after years of hurt. This year would be special in a different way. It would be confirmation. Proof that last year wasn't a fluke, wasn't a one-time exception, wasn't going to fade away as quickly as it had appeared. This year would be evidence that we'd actually changed, that we'd built something sustainable, that we were committed to being family not just in moments of crisis or grand gestures, but in the ongoing, ordinary work of staying connected. We planned to gather at my house again on Christmas Eve. Everyone would arrive in the afternoon and stay through Christmas Day, making a long weekend of it. We'd cook together, eat together, exchange gifts, watch Christmas movies, play games, do all the normal family things we'd missed for 8 years. The week before Christmas, I found myself in the attic pulling down decorations, just like I had a year ago. But this year felt different. Last year, I'd been going through the motions, decorating for a celebration that felt hollow. This year, I was decorating for a celebration that would be full of people, full of love, full of joy. I put up the tree with help from Emily, who'd driven up early to spend a few days with me before everyone else arrived. We worked together, untangling lights and arranging branches, talking about everything and nothing the way mothers and daughters do when they're comfortable with each other. Last year changed everything, Emily said as she hung an ornament, the tiny nurse's cap she'd made so many years ago. I know we've talked about it a lot, but I don't think I can ever fully express how grateful I am that we found our way back. I don't know what my life would look like right now if we hadn't. Better in some ways, harder in others, I suggested. You would have survived. We both would have. But surviving isn't the same as thriving. No, she agreed. It's not. Do you ever worry, I asked, that it might fall apart again? That something might happen and we'll end up back where we were? Emily was quiet for a moment, considering. Sometimes, she admitted. When Danny and I disagree about something, there's sometimes this split second where I panic, wondering if this is it, if this is the thing that breaks us again. But then I remember that we're different now. We have tools we didn't have before. We have a commitment to working through things instead of running from them. That's wise, I told her, and brave. Being afraid something might break but choosing to invest in it anyway. That's what faith looks like. On Christmas Eve, everyone arrived right on schedule. The house filled with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of 9 people trying to navigate the same space. We cooked dinner together, Danny and Emily working side by side in the kitchen, their movements synchronized in a way that suggested they'd done this together many times over the past year. After dinner, after presents, after all the traditional activities, I asked everyone to gather in the living room. I had something I wanted to share with them. A year ago today, I began, I thought I knew what my Christmas would look like. I thought it would be another quiet evening with half my family, followed by another quiet day with the other half. I'd made peace with that reality. I'd stopped hoping for anything different. I paused, emotion making my voice thick. And then you all showed up, together, healed, or at least healing. And you gave me the best Christmas present I'd ever received, my family whole again. This year has been. I don't even have words for what this year has been. Watching you rebuild your relationships, seeing the kids become close, having family dinners where everyone is present, not having to carefully edit my conversations to avoid mentioning one of you to the other. It's been everything I wanted for 8 years and had stopped believing was possible. I pulled out a wrapped package and handed it to Danny and Emily together. This is for both of you. Open it together. They unwrapped it carefully, Emily lifting the lid of the box while Danny held it steady. Inside was a photo album, a thick one, carefully curated over months of work. The first half of the album was photos from their childhood and young adulthood. Christmas mornings and birthday parties and school events and family vacations. Pictures of them as babies in Thomas's arms, as toddlers playing together, as children helping their father with projects, as teenagers at their graduations, as young adults at their weddings. A visual history of their relationship before the rift. The second half of the album was empty pages, waiting to be filled. The first part is your past, I explained. Everything you were before things fell apart. I want you to remember that version of yourselves, those children who loved each other before adult pain got in the way. The second part is your future, pages waiting to be filled with new memories, beach trips and family dinners and graduations and weddings and all the moments that are still coming. Whatever happens, whatever challenges you face, whatever disagreements you have these pages to fill together. Don't let them stay empty. Danny and Emily were both crying, paging through the photos, pointing out memories they'd forgotten, laughing and crying at the same time. "Thank you, Mom," Danny said. "This is perfect." "We'll fill these pages," Emily promised. "Together, we'll make sure every single one of them holds a memory worth keeping." The rest of the evening was gentle and quiet, all of us tired but happy. Content to just be together without needing constant activity or entertainment. The kids eventually fell asleep in various locations, Sarah on the couch, Emma and Jacob on air mattresses in the living room. The adults stayed up a bit later, talking softly, sipping coffee, enjoying the peaceful end to a beautiful day. Before bed, I stepped outside onto the front porch, needing a moment alone with my thoughts. The night was cold but clear, stars visible despite the ambient light from the neighborhood Christmas decorations. I wrapped my arms around myself, looking up at the sky, thinking about Thomas and wondering if he could see this, if he knew what had happened, if he was proud of how his children had found their way back to each other. The door opened behind me, and Emily stepped out, wrapping a blanket around both of us. We stood together in comfortable silence for a minute before she spoke. "I used to think forgiveness was weak," she said quietly. "I thought holding on to anger made me strong, made me principled. I thought letting go would mean that what happened didn't matter, that the hurt wasn't real." "What changed your mind?" I asked. "Danny did," she said simply. "When he reached out to me, when he was willing to admit he'd been wrong, even though I was the one who'd said the cruel thing about Dad, that took more strength than I'd ever had. He could have stayed angry forever. He was justified in staying angry. But he chose something harder. He chose to try again." "You both chose," I reminded her. "It took both of you being brave, both of you being willing to be vulnerable, both of you choosing to try." "I know," she said, "but him going first, that mattered. It gave me permission to be vulnerable too. It showed me that maybe reconciliation wasn't weakness after all." We stood there a while longer, mother and daughter, looking at the stars, grateful for second chances and the mysterious ways that healing happens when you least expect it. The months after that second Christmas together brought more changes, more growth, more deepening of relationships. In February, Danny and Emily did something I never could have imagined. They went to therapy together, not because things were bad, but because they wanted to make sure they had the tools to keep things good. They wanted to understand the patterns that had led to their estrangement, to develop better communication strategies, to process their grief about their father in healthy ways. They told me about it over Sunday dinner at my house, a weekly tradition we'd started in January. Every Sunday, whoever could make it would come to my house for dinner. Sometimes it was everyone, sometimes just a few people, but there was always someone, always family, always connection. "We meet with Dr. Rodriguez every other Tuesday," Danny explained. "We talk about our childhood, about Dad's death, about the things we said to each other during the fight. But we also talk about the present, about how to handle disagreements, about how to support each other better." "It's been really helpful," Emily added. "Hard sometimes, but helpful. We're learning things about each other we never knew, understanding perspectives we'd never considered." I felt proud of them, so incredibly proud. They weren't just patching up their relationship, they were actively working to make it stronger, healthier, more resilient than it had been before. In March, Sarah got engaged to a young man she'd been dating for 2 years. The whole family celebrated together, gathering at a restaurant in Atlanta for dinner. It was the first family milestone since the reconciliation, the first time we were all together for something new, rather than something healing. Danny gave a toast that made everyone cry. He talked about watching Sarah grow up, about missing so many years of being her uncle, about his regrets and his gratitude that they'd found their way back to each other before it was too late. He talked about his hopes for her marriage, his prayers that she and her fiancé would face their challenges together instead of letting them drive them apart. "Learn from our mistakes," he told Sarah and her fiancé, gesturing to include himself and Emily. "Talk to each other, forgive quickly, don't let pride or hurt create distance between you, because the years you lose can never be fully recovered, and the regret is heavy." After the dinner, Sarah pulled Danny aside, and I watched them have a long conversation that clearly meant the world to both of them. Later, she told me they'd talked about him walking her down the aisle alongside her mother, since her father had been absent from her life since the divorce. Emily had cried when Sarah asked her permission, and Danny had cried when Sarah asked him. "It's what family does," Sarah had said simply. "And you're my family. You've always been my family, even when we weren't acting like it." The wedding was planned for October, giving everyone plenty of time to prepare and save and arrange schedules. We all went dress shopping together in April, me, Emily, Jennifer, Emma, and Sarah, making a day of it, laughing and crying and offering opinions on every dress Sarah tried on. She chose a simple but elegant gown that made her look like a princess, and we all agreed it was perfect. In May, Emma graduated from UNC Chapel Hill with her nursing degree. The whole family drove up for the ceremony, filling an entire row in the auditorium, cheering loudly when her name was called. Afterward, we went out to dinner, and Emily gave Emma a gift, a stethoscope engraved with her name and graduation date. "Welcome to the profession," Emily told her niece. "I'm so proud of you, and I'm so glad we'll get to share this bond, this calling." Emma hugged her aunt tightly. "I wouldn't have chosen this path without you and Sarah, watching you both care for people, seeing how much it matters to you. That's what made me realize this was what I wanted to do." In June, Jacob graduated high school. He'd been accepted to NC State's construction management program, following in his father's and grandfather's footsteps. Danny gave him a set of professional tools at his graduation party, the same set that Thomas had given Danny when he'd graduated. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you," Danny told his son, voice thick with emotion. He loved building things, loved working with his hands, loved the satisfaction of starting with nothing but an idea and ending with something solid and real. "I see that same love in you." Jacob, trying to be tough the way teenage boys do, managed to hold it together until Danny hugged him. Then he cried, letting his father hold him while he processed the weight of carrying on this family tradition. July brought another beach trip, this one even better than the last, because we knew what we were doing, what worked and what didn't, how to share space without getting on each other's nerves. We had a standing family meeting every evening where we discussed the next day's plans, making sure everyone had a say, making sure no one felt dragged along to activities they didn't enjoy. One night, while the kids were playing cards on the porch, the adults stayed inside talking. The conversation drifted to the future, to the changes that were coming. "Sarah's getting married," Emily said. "Emma's starting her nursing career. Jacob's going to college. They're all growing up, moving into their own lives. I'm so proud of them, but I'm also sad that this phase is ending." "That's what being a parent feels like," I told her. "Constant joy mixed with constant sadness. You're always celebrating who they're becoming while mourning who they're leaving behind." "But we get to do this together now," Jennifer pointed out. We get to watch them grow and change and build their lives, and we get to support them as one family instead of separate pieces of a family. That makes all the difference. It does, Danny agreed. I can't imagine going through Sarah's wedding without Em. Or Emma starting her career without Em being there to mentor her. Or any of these milestones without all of us together. We lost 8 years, Emily said softly. 8 years of memories we'll never get back. Birthdays and graduations and ordinary Sundays. I hate that we lost that time. But we found our way back, I reminded her. And that's not nothing. That's actually everything. Some families fall apart and stay apart forever. You two did the hard work of putting it back together. That matters. In August, Emma started her first nursing job at the same hospital where Emily worked. They'd specifically applied for different units, so they wouldn't be working directly together. Emma wanted to establish her own professional identity without being seen as just Emily's niece. But they often saw each other in the cafeteria or the parking lot, and they texted frequently throughout their shifts. Emily told me it was strange but wonderful to run into her niece in the hallways, to hear other nurses talk about the new grad who was so eager and competent and kind. I see myself in her, she said. The version of myself that loved this work before it became routine, before I became jaded. She reminds me why I chose this profession in the first place. In September, we all gathered at my house for Sunday dinner like we did every week. But this time, Sarah brought her fiancé, a kind young man named Marcus, who was clearly nervous about meeting the whole family at once. We went easy on him, including him in conversations, making sure he felt welcomed, giving him space to relax and be himself. At one point during the evening, I found myself in the kitchen with Marcus, helping him find where we kept the coffee mugs. He looked at me with wonder in his eyes. I've never seen a family like this, he admitted. My family is complicated, lots of dysfunction, lots of drama. But you all seem to genuinely like each other. Is it always like this? I thought about how to answer honestly without overwhelming him. It wasn't always like this, I said finally. We went through some very hard times. There were years when this family was broken in ways that seemed impossible to fix. But we did the work of healing. We chose forgiveness over grudges, connection over pride. How did you do it? He asked. We did it imperfectly, I told him, with a lot of tears and uncomfortable conversations and backsliding and trying again. But the key was that we all wanted it. Everyone had to be willing to be vulnerable, to admit their mistakes, to try again even when it was hard. You can't force reconciliation, but you can create space for it. You can keep loving people even when they're not loving you back, and sometimes, eventually, they find their way back to you. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Sarah talks about her family a lot, about how much she loves you all. I'm glad I get to be part of it now. We're glad to have you, I said sincerely. And I meant it. This young man who loved my granddaughter, who was nervous but trying, who saw the beauty in our imperfect family, he was already part of us, already woven into the fabric of our story. October arrived with its brilliant fall colors, and with it came Sarah's wedding. The ceremony was at a small chapel in Atlanta, simple but beautiful, filled with flowers and love and tears of joy. Emily walked Sarah down the aisle with Danny beside her, both of them crying, both of them so clearly honored to be part of this moment. During the ceremony, Sarah read a passage about love being patient and kind, about love bearing all things and believing all things and hoping all things. As I listened to those familiar words, I thought about how they applied not just to romantic love, but to family love too. How we'd had to be patient with each other's healing process. How we'd had to choose kindness over being right. How we'd had to bear the weight of past hurts while believing in the possibility of a different future. At the reception, Danny and Emily gave a joint toast to the newlyweds. They talked about watching Sarah grow up, about being grateful they got to be part of this day together, about their hopes for the marriage and their commitment to supporting it however they could. Sarah, Emily said, You were part of the reason we found our way back to each other. Your courage in approaching your uncle in that restaurant, your refusal to accept that our family had to stay broken, that started a chain reaction that changed everything. We're here today, together, because you believed we could be. Don't underestimate the power of believing in people, Danny added. Don't underestimate the impact of refusing to accept that broken things have to stay broken. Sarah believed in us when we'd stopped believing in ourselves, and that changed everything. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even Marcus was crying, overwhelmed by the emotion and the love and the beauty of this family that had chosen to heal. The dancing started after dinner, and I watched my family move around the dance floor, Danny and Emily dancing together, siblings again in every way that mattered. Jennifer and Emily chatting easily while their husbands got drinks. Emma and Jacob teaching Marcus some ridiculous dance moves that had everyone laughing. Sarah glowing with happiness, surrounded by family who loved her. At one point, a slow song came on, and Danny found me sitting at our table, catching my breath from all the excitement. "May I have this dance, Mom?" he asked, offering his hand. I let him lead me to the dance floor, and we moved slowly to the music, his arms supporting me because my balance isn't what it used to be. "Thank you," he said quietly, so only I could hear. "For never giving up on us, for loving us even when we were unlovable, for being patient through all those years when Em and I were too stubborn to fix things." "You don't have to thank me," I told him. "That's what mothers do. We love our children, period. Not because they deserve it, not because they've earned it, but because they're ours." "Well, I'm grateful anyway," he said. "I'm grateful you showed me what unconditional love looks like. It made it easier to extend that same grace to Emily, to forgive her even though part of me wanted to stay angry." The song ended and Emily cut in, wanting her own dance with me. We moved around the floor, and she rested her head on my shoulder in a way she hadn't done since she was a little girl. "I love you, Mama," she whispered. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for this." "I love you too, baby," I whispered back. "I'm so proud of you, of both of you, of the family you've rebuilt." After the wedding, after Sarah and Marcus left for their honeymoon, after the decorations were taken down and the leftover cake was distributed, our family gathered at Emily's apartment in Atlanta. We were all too emotionally exhausted to drive home, so we ordered pizza and sat around her living room, processing the beautiful day we'd just experienced. "That was perfect," Sarah's friend texted her, and Sarah read it aloud to us. "Your family is goals, the way they all love each other, the way they showed up for you. That's beautiful." "It is beautiful," Jennifer agreed, "and it's real. That's what makes it so special. We're not perfect. We have our struggles and our disagreements, but we show up for each other. We do the work." "We almost didn't, though," Emily said quietly. "We almost let pride and hurt destroy what we had. If it wasn't for Sarah, for Emma, for Jennifer pushing Danny to reconsider, for all the small moments that added up to reconciliation, we would have missed this. We would have missed all of it." "But we didn't," Danny said firmly. "We didn't miss it. We're here. We made it. And we're going to keep making it, day by day, choice by choice." "To family," I said, raising my water glass in yet another toast. "To the family we were, the family we are, and the family we're still becoming." "To family," they all echoed, and we drank to that simple but profound truth. As November turned to December and Christmas 2025 approached, I found myself reflecting on the past 2 years. 2 years ago, I'd been resigned to a divided family, a lifetime of separate celebrations, a Christmas that would never feel whole. 1 year ago, I'd experienced a miracle I didn't expect, couldn't have predicted, barely believed even as it was happening. Now, preparing for this third Christmas since the reconciliation, I felt something different than resignation or surprise. I felt peace, contentment, gratitude that went bone deep. This Christmas wouldn't have the shock value of last year. There wouldn't be that moment of disbelief when I opened the door to find everyone together. But it would have something else. The quiet confidence that comes from knowing this is real, this is lasting, this is the new normal we've built together. We were all gathering at my house again, arriving on Christmas Eve afternoon and staying through Christmas Day. But this year, we were also bringing Sarah and Marcus, officially incorporating him into our family traditions. Emma was bringing her boyfriend too, a young resident she'd met at the hospital who she was clearly smitten with. Our family was growing, expanding, welcoming new people into the circle. On December 23rd, as I was getting the house ready for everyone's arrival, I found myself in the attic looking for an extra blanket. While I was up there, I noticed a box I'd forgotten about. A box of Christmas decorations I'd stopped using years ago because they made me too sad. I opened it carefully, finding ornaments from when the kids were little, stockings with names embroidered on them, a tree skirt my mother had made before she died, things I'd put away during the estrangement because they reminded me too much of what we'd lost. I brought the box downstairs and started going through it, deciding what to keep and what to finally let go. Some things were too worn, too outdated, too tied to a past we couldn't return to. But some things, like the stockings with Danny and Emily's names, like the ornaments they'd made in school, those deserved to be brought back out, to be incorporated into our new traditions. When Emily arrived that evening to help with preparations, she found me sitting on the floor surrounded by decorations and memories. "Oh my God," she said, recognizing things she hadn't seen in years. "Mom, where did you find all this?" "The attic," I said. I'd hidden them away. They hurt too much to look at during the years you and Danny weren't speaking. She sat down next to me, picking up her old stocking, running her fingers over the embroidered name. "Can we use these again? This year? All of us together?" "That's what I was thinking," I admitted. "We can't go back to the past, but we can bring some of it forward with us. We can honor what we were while celebrating what we are now." We spent the rest of the evening going through the box together, sorting and remembering and deciding. Some things we put back in the box to save for the grandchildren when they had their own homes. Some things we decided to incorporate into this year's celebration. Some things we let go, acknowledging that some memories are better kept in our hearts than in physical form. When Danny arrived the next afternoon with his family, he found the stockings hung on the mantel. His and Emily's from when they were children, now joined by new stockings for all the grandchildren, for Jennifer, for Sarah and Marcus, for Emma's boyfriend. A visual representation of how our family had grown and changed and expanded. He stood there for a long moment, just looking at them, and I could see him processing the symbolism. "We're really doing this," he said softly. "We're really building something new while honoring what we had before." "We are," I confirmed. "Is that okay?" "It's more than okay," he said, turning to look at me with tears in his eyes. "It's perfect." That evening, as everyone arrived and the house filled with people and noise and life, I felt Thomas's presence more strongly than I had in years. Not in a supernatural sense, but in the way that the people we love stay with us through the values they taught us, the lessons they modeled, the love they gave us. He would have loved this. Loved seeing Danny and Emily together, laughing and joking and being siblings again. Loved meeting Marcus and Emily's boyfriend and watching the family expand. Loved seeing the grandchildren thriving and pursuing their dreams. Loved knowing that the family he'd helped create hadn't been permanently broken by his death, that we'd found our way back to each other. During dinner, I made a toast that I'd been thinking about for weeks. 2 years ago, I began, I thought I knew what Christmas would always be. Quiet, divided, manageable, but incomplete. I'd accepted that some things were broken in ways that couldn't be fixed. 1 year ago, you all surprised me with the gift I'd stopped hoping for: reconciliation, reunion, healing. You showed me that some things that seem impossibly broken can actually be repaired with courage and forgiveness and love. This year, you're showing me something else. You're showing me that healing isn't a one-time event. It's a choice you make every day. It's showing up for each other consistently. It's doing the work even when it's hard. It's building new traditions while honoring old ones. It's growing and changing and welcoming new people into the circle. I paused, looking around the table at all their faces. These people I loved more than life itself. You've taught me that it's never too late to heal, never too late to forgive, never too late to choose love over hurt. And that's the greatest gift you could have ever given me. To family, I said, raising my glass. To family, they all echoed, and we drank to the beautiful, messy, imperfect miracle of being together. After dinner, after presents, after all the traditional activities, we gathered in the living room to watch home videos again. But this time, we also looked at videos from the past 2 years, the beach trip, Sarah's wedding, Sunday dinners at my house, all the ordinary and extraordinary moments we'd captured since the reconciliation. We watched ourselves healing in real time. We saw the awkwardness of those first interactions slowly transform into genuine comfort. We saw the grandchildren rediscovering their sibling-cousin relationships. We saw Danny and Emily relearning how to be brother and sister. "We've come so far," Emily marveled. "Look at us 2 years ago at the beach. We were trying so hard, so conscious of every word and gesture. And look at us now. It's natural again. Easy." "It's not always easy," Danny corrected gently. "We still have our moments. We still disagree. We still occasionally hurt each other's feelings. But we work through it," Emily finished. "We don't let it fester. We talk about it. We apologize. We move forward." "That's what makes it real," Jennifer said. "Perfect families don't exist. Healthy families are the ones that know how to handle imperfection, how to repair ruptures, how to keep choosing each other even when it would be easier not to." As the evening wore on and people started heading to bed, I found myself alone in the living room one last time, looking at the tree and its mismatched ornaments. Old ones from when the kids were young, new ones we'd collected in the past 2 years, all of them together, representing our full story. This time, when I talked to Thomas, it wasn't with sadness or regret or loneliness. It was with joy. "We did it," I told him. "Our family is whole again. Not the same as it was when you were here, but whole, in a new way. The kids forgave each other. They're building real relationships again. The grandchildren are close. We're making new memories while honoring old ones." I imagined I could feel him smiling, could sense his approval and his pride in how our children had grown and healed and chosen love. "Thank you," I whispered, "for the years we had together, for the family we created, for the love you showed us all. It's still rippling out, still affecting us, still shaping who we are. You're still part of this, even though you're gone." I sat there, in the quiet, grateful beyond words for everything I'd been given. The years with Thomas, the love of my children, the joy of reconciliation, the hope of more Christmases together still to come. The miracle I'd stopped believing in had happened. Not once, but continuously, every day that my family chose to stay connected, to work through challenges, to love each other despite their flaws and differences. And that, I realized, was the real miracle. Not the dramatic reunion on Christmas Eve 2 years ago, though that was beautiful. The real miracle was the sustained commitment to keep showing up, keep trying, keep loving even when it wasn't easy. That was the miracle I'd almost stopped believing in. And it was happening every single day, in small moments of grace and forgiveness and love that added up to a family that was healing, growing, and becoming stronger with each passing day. I went to bed that night with a full heart, grateful for miracles both dramatic and subtle, both unexpected and earned through hard work, both past and still unfolding in the present. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day. We'd wake up together, make breakfast together, exchange gifts together, celebrate together, and it wouldn't be shocking or surprising anymore. It would just be normal, beautiful, ordinary, perfect normal. And that was the greatest gift of all. If you're reading this story, or rather, if you've listened this far, I want you to know something. I'm 72 years old, and I've lived through a lot. I've experienced joy and heartbreak, love and loss, hope and despair. I've made mistakes and learned lessons, failed and succeeded, given up and tried again. And here's what I know for certain. It's never too late to heal. It's never too late to forgive. It's never too late to choose love over hurt, connection over pride, family over being right. Maybe you're listening to this and thinking about your own family, your own estrangements, your own broken relationships. Maybe you've given up hope that things could ever be different. Maybe you've resigned yourself to permanent distance from people you love. I'm here to tell you that resignation isn't the only option. Reconciliation might seem impossible, but impossible things happen every day. They happen when people get brave enough to be vulnerable, humble enough to admit their mistakes, courageous enough to try again, even when they've been hurt before. They happen when someone decides to make the first move, even though they don't know if it will be reciprocated. They happen when someone chooses to answer the phone, even though they're still angry. They happen when someone decides that being in relationship with their family is more important than being right about who hurt whom worse. I'm not saying it's easy. God knows it's not easy. There's a reason so many families stay broken, because healing requires work and risk, and the possibility that you'll be hurt again. It requires giving up the righteousness of your anger, the clarity of your victim narrative, the simplicity of just cutting people out and moving on. But the alternative, spending years or decades separated from people you love, missing weddings and graduations and ordinary Sundays, carrying the weight of unfinished business and unresolved hurt. That's hard too. Different hard, but equally painful in its own way. So if you're sitting there right now, thinking about someone you're estranged from, someone you miss but don't know how to reach out to, someone you're too proud or too hurt or too scared to contact, I want to challenge you. What would happen if you tried? What would happen if you sent that text, made that call, wrote that letter? Yes, they might reject you. Yes, you might get hurt again. Yes, it might not work out the way you hope, but it also might work. It might be the beginning of something beautiful. It might be the miracle you've stopped believing in. My children didn't reconcile because I forced them to, or because circumstances left them no choice. They reconciled because they got brave. Because they decided that their relationship with each other mattered more than their pride. Because they were willing to be vulnerable, to admit their mistakes, to try again, even though they'd hurt each other before. You can do that too. You can be that brave. You can be that humble. You can choose healing over hurt. And if you're on the other side, if you're the person waiting for someone to reach out, hoping for an apology that might never come, wondering if you should make the first move even though you weren't the one who was wrong, I want to tell you something too. Sometimes being right isn't as important as being in relationship. Sometimes you have to choose between justice and connection, and there's no shame in choosing connection. I'm not saying you should accept abuse or allow yourself to be mistreated. Boundaries are important. Safety is important. But if the hurt was the kind of normal family hurt that comes from misunderstanding and grief and pain rather than from malice or cruelty, maybe it's worth extending grace. Maybe it's worth being the bigger person, not because the other person deserves it, but because you deserve to have your family whole again. Before I finish this story, I want to say thank you to everyone who's listened this far. Thank you for letting me share my story, for caring about an old woman's family drama, for investing your time in hearing about reconciliation and healing and love. If this story touched your heart, if it gave you hope, if it made you think about your own relationships differently, please take a moment to like this video. It truly helps this channel reach more people who might need to hear that miracles can still happen. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss other stories like this one. Leave a comment telling me what you thought, or let me know what country or city you're watching from. I love hearing from our community all over the world. Your support means everything and helps this channel continue sharing real stories that matter. I don't know what your situation is. I don't know what you're struggling with, who you're estranged from, what pain you're carrying, But I know this: you're stronger than you think, you're braver than you feel, and you're capable of more healing than you can imagine. Don't give up on the people you love. Don't give up on the possibility of reconciliation. Don't give up on miracles, even when you can't see how they could possibly happen. Because sometimes the miracles we stop believing in are the ones that are just about to occur. Sometimes the healing we think is impossible is already beginning, in ways we can't yet see. Sometimes the people we think will never change are already changing, already softening, already preparing to reach out. I stopped believing in Christmas miracles. I'd given up hope that my family would ever be whole again. I'd made peace with a future that looked exactly like my past, divided, incomplete, manageable, but lonely. And then, on an ordinary Christmas Eve, when I was expecting nothing special, everything changed. My children walked through my door together, healed and healing, ready to be family again. If that can happen to me, to an old woman who'd stopped hoping, stopped praying, stopped believing in the possibility of reconciliation, then it can happen to you too. Your miracle is possible. Your healing is possible. Your family being whole again is possible. You just have to be brave enough to try, humble enough to forgive, courageous enough to hope even when hope seems foolish. It's never too late to heal a broken relationship. It's never too late to forgive an old hurt. It's never too late to choose love over anger, connection over pride, family over being right. It's never too late for a miracle. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for caring about my family. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. May your own Christmas be filled with love and connection and the courage to reach out to whoever you're missing. May you experience your own miracles in whatever form they take. May you find the healing you're looking for, the reconciliation you're hoping for, the love you deserve. And may you remember, always, that some things that seem broken beyond repair can actually be healed with courage and forgiveness and love. Merry Christmas, my friends. God bless you all.